Julian for making it all happen. So the very first item on the agenda is one of the best examples of decentralization in stablecoins. Robert Lauko from Liquidity, please, stage is yours.
Thank you, Garrett. Clicker, thanks. Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and present Scaling Without Breaking, the next generation of DeFi stablecoins. I'm Robert Lauko, the founder and head of research at Liquidity. So, this doesn't work yet, I guess. Maybe I have to turn it on, or? No worries, I think we'll sort that out in a sec. But in the meantime, maybe I can just introduce you to a concept which is probably familiar to all of you, which is the stablecoin trilemma. I will just show it on the next slide. But I guess it's easy enough to just say a few words about it right now. I mean, you know that stablecoins like LUSD, they are very decentralized and they are also built to be very robust, but they may suffer from some scalability limitations. DAI was in a similar situation, but they decided to solve this by adding more centralization, by adding the PSM module, so that they could scale more, but of course that came at the expense of decentralization. And then you also have other stable coins, like the fiat-backed ones, which are obviously centralized, but they can scale basically infinitely. And then on the left-hand side, if the triangle was there, but it's not, the left-hand side you would see the algorithmic stable coins, which I would say like Luna, of course, Basis Cash or Basis Coin were the prime examples. Unfortunately, they didn't work out. So yeah, that's the situation. And maybe this, oh, cool, thanks a lot. Oh, now I have to go back a bit. That's all too much alpha. Okay, yeah, this was the situation I was just describing before. I think, yeah, I don't need to spend more time on this. But let me outline maybe a novel form of stablecoin which may not be as familiar to all of you, that like the main suspects. But on the left-hand side, I will just start with summarizing some of the like main challenges of the CDP-backed stablecoins like LUSD, which are, as I mentioned, related to scalability limitations. And with the scalability limitation, there is also another consequence, which is that the peg cannot be as stable as you would want to have it, because it's only a soft mechanism. You don't have like real arbitrage in both directions. And then another negative challenge or consequence is that liquidity on DEXs, for example, can be a big challenge because you need to pay a lot of incentives, which is not sustainable. So that's the situation, but then on the right-hand side, I've outlined a novel concept which some projects have tried. I call it decentralized reserve, and the main difference there is that instead of having like multiple individual CDPs or borrowing positions, you have one reserve, ideally a decentralized reserve, which belongs to the protocol, and which then allows basically people to just come in with their ETH or whatever the backing asset is and just mint more stable coins. So it basically allows you to mint and redeem the stable coin at will, similarly to USDC, but in a decentralized way, hopefully. And if you achieve that, then it also means that the peg becomes much stronger, thanks to arbitrage, and also the system itself can then act as a primary AMM, because the system itself is giving out the stable coin and buying it back basically at all times. Now, the big challenge with this concept is that now what you need to make sure is that your reserve is always large enough to be able to fully back or over back the stablecoin so that it can buy it back whenever somebody redeems. And that's not easy because especially in bear markets and difficult market situations, those like existing, let's say, examples of this concept have proven to be like they haven't really worked as well as in theory. And there, like on the left-hand side, you see the corresponding challenge with the CDPs is just an efficient liquidation mechanism, and I think that's the easier problem to solve. So now really the challenge that we are now focusing on as a team is how to make sure, how to hedge a reserve basically against this price risk. And here there are two concepts already that you know from those systems. Like on the left-hand side, you see something I call recapitalization by inflation, which is basically a simple concept. It's kind of similar to the algorithmic stablecoins like Luna, but it has a third token, which is the reserve asset. So basically what people do is they can mint and redeem the stablecoin by providing some, let's say, layer one asset. It could be Ether, it could be another like asset from the chain. And then whenever the system is kind of below its target backing ratio or collateral ratio, the system would then mint a third token. I call it a recapitalization token. That's kind of the Luna-like token, which is then minted to basically and then sold to people, which would then provide more of this harder reserve asset to kind of increase the reserve so that it can always then buy back the stablecoin when somebody redeems. So that's this type of approach. And then on the right-hand side, you see another one, which is a bit more, let's say, traditional, or in TradFi, there are similar concepts of delta-neutral hedging. So what happens there is you still have the reserve, it's some volatile asset, and the stablecoin as a liability that you need to back. But now what people can do is they basically still provide more of the reserve assets. So they're like hedging agents that like try to back up the reserve. And what they get in return is some form of derivative, like a perpetual future, for example. So you would then be kind of on the leverage long end. You are basically taking over the volatility risk from the protocol. So that's like just on a high level, but now both of those approaches have their challenges. Like the recapitalization through inflation approach has first of all the challenge of being very capital inefficient. At least the protocols that are out there, they, like JET, for example, requires a target collateral ratio between 400 and 800%, which is, yeah, pretty high. And then with the delta-neutral hedging approach, there are many different ways how you can do it. Like one is that you would go to a centralized exchange and open like a short position so that, then people would then take the long end or long side of the trade, but that's not really decentralized then. I mean, as long as you're using centralized exchanges. But there are also other ways, like Engel did. I mean, that's interesting because they did their own built-in kind of futures market, even though the futures are a bit more exotic than the normal ones, but they were basically trying to do that internally. Unfortunately, we have seen that some of those examples have failed, like kind of Neutrino, USDN, I mean, had a similar fate to Luna. They ended up in a death spiral because when the price of, what was it, I even forgot, like Wave, I think, token was their like reserve asset, and then when Wave like plummeted, they had to mint more of their like recapitalization token, and it just ended up going down to zero. But there are some examples like Dollar on Chain, which is, who knows Dollar on Chain here, by the way? Oh, 1, 2. It's very like I find it interesting because it's older than Liquidity and maybe almost as old as Maker, but little known. That is still working, and there is also JED, which is working, but they are pretty small and not very like well known. Then on the delta neutral side, it seems that all of the projects that have tried it, they ended up pivoting. They saw that it kind of didn't work, and then they took measures to make sure that they don't collapse. So that's the situation, but we still think that delta-neutral hedging is the way forward and kind of the holy grail, but we need to improve it. We need to change something to make it really work. Because the challenge, as I already mentioned, is kind of, in a bear market, there is not really a demand for those like risky leveraged positions, which means that the protocol cannot sell enough of them in a short time period, which also means that the protocol may have to kind of subsidize it or incentivize it so that, let's say on a futures market, that would mean like a negative funding rate, but then the protocol may kind of bleed out over time. So we need to make sure, we need to cut down on the costs for the protocol while still attracting people to those hedging positions. So how can we do that? We tried multiple ideas. I mean, we simulated them. So one is just like I mean, the protocol can charge some fees, like on minting and redemption, on other user interactions. So we can use the fees or try to use them to kind of finance some incentives, some funding rate, but it didn't really turn out to be sustainable. What you could also try is dilute existing users, like make it more attractive for new hedging agents to come into the system by diluting the existing ones. I mean, but that is kind of similar to this inflationary model where you are, like, again, at risk of causing a downward spiral. So then eventually we got back to field zero and rethought, like, what can we do? And then it kind of all made sense. Yeah, let's do something which is inherently more, like a hedging product which is inherently more attractive, even in adverse market situations. And then we can also cut down on the costs for the protocol. And there are really two innovations here. I will outline it a bit more detail. One is on the user side or user's end. Like, we need to make the product more attractive by adding principal protection. So now, even in a bear market, the users, they have capped downside. So it's not that now you're in a crazy 10x leverage position, but you know when you get in, like, your losses are capped. So that's on the user's end, and by doing so, we can hopefully increase the market and increase the attractivity for becoming a backer or hedger of the system. On the right-hand side, you see the protocol, and for the protocol, what we ended up doing, or what we found out, is that there is a neat way of reducing the hedging costs by making it so that this principal protection is guaranteed in a very unique way, rather than a direct payout, and I will show how that works. And by doing so, again, we can reduce the strain on the system. So what's this product now first? Like, what is this principal protected leverage or principal protected hedging product all about? So first of all, it's a perpetual. Like, it means that you create it, it's set and forget, you open a position, and you're not subject to liquidation either. So it's like something you can open and just see how it evolves. You don't need to actively manage it, which is, I think, already like a good UX. But then more importantly, the principal protection, and that's the key benefit here, what does that really mean? So let's say somebody wants to become a backer or hedger of the system by depositing 10 ETH, or by opening a position with a principal or size of 10 ETH. Now, I mean, there are two scenarios. Like, ETH can either go up or down. So here, ETH is just an example for a reserve asset. It can be any asset. It could be staked ETH or Rocket ETH, whatever. But here, ETH, yeah, so we have like somebody who opened a position with 10 ETH, and now when ETH goes up, and there is this implied leverage because you are kind of getting the leverage from the reserve, like those stablecoin minters who mint the stablecoin, they provide more ETH to the reserve, of course, at kind of at 1-to-1, which means that now whoever is a hedger would also benefit from this extra ETH, like benefit from the upside coming from the ETH that was deposited by the stablecoin minters. And then, like here, just an example, like when ETH doubles, maybe we have this kind of leverage which makes your position now worth 40 ETH. So that's the positive scenario. But then, of course, ETH can also plummet. Let's say it plummets by half. But then the good thing is, thanks to the principal protection, you would still get 10 ETH. I mean, nominally, you would always be able to claim or get 10 ETH back. And obviously, if you think about it, you have a position of 10, but it can only go up, really. It cannot go down in terms of it, like ETH here is the numeraire. But that means that this position on a secondary market, or just the fair value, if you kind of try to calculate it, should be worth more than 10 ETH, because you would price in the upside without pricing in a downside. But that makes it very interesting now for the system. Now the system can sell this position to the user, to the backer, at a higher price, like at a premium. Like a position that is kind of has a principal of 10 can be sold, let's say, for 13 or 14 or 12, whatever ETH. So there is this premium. Now the system can collect this premium in addition to the principal, so it can collect more than the 10 ETH. Why is this interesting? Now, one thing is that obviously the protection is only needed when the price of ETH plummets, and it has to plummet a lot. Otherwise, people who have a position, I mean, they open the position with 10, now Ether has gone down, but they would still maybe think or hope that Ether would go up. So rather than claiming the 10 ETH principal, they would hope for a future where ETH would go up and then the position would eventually be worth maybe 15 or 20. So the protection is only claimed rarely in those downturn scenarios, or a bit more technically, whenever the market value of the position falls below the payoff or the value that the system guarantees, then you would want to claim your principal. Otherwise, you wouldn't do that. You would rather sell it on the secondary market to somebody else because you can sell it at a premium. This is all nice, but there is a problem. What if everybody wants to claim their principal at the same time in a big crash? There is no hard guarantee that the total liability of the system coming from all those principals is smaller than the total amount of collected premium, because the premium that the system can collect is basically this extra reserve or this extra bucket that then can be used to finance the principal protection. But there can be a situation here which is a bit similar to a bank run, because yeah, the liabilities could still be higher than the collected premiums. So we need more. We need a second innovation. So how can we make this principal protection less of an issue, or like a smaller liability for the system? We need to decrease the liability. And we do that by integrating the secondary market into the primary system in a very innovative way. So instead of paying out the principal upon claim, we can make sure that people can sell their existing hedging positions or leverage positions on the secondary market for the principal. The system guarantees this by by kind of boosting up or propping up the positions through a subsidy mechanism, which then makes the position gradually increase in value until you will find a buyer who pays the 10 ETH, who pays the principal. And then it turns out, if you do that the protocol only needs, first of all, the protocol only needs to subsidize a fraction of all the positions, because most of the positions won't be in a state where their market value is lower than the payoff. And in those scenarios, you don't need subsidies. You can just pay your position as is on the secondary market, because there is still a positive premium on it. So only a subset needs to be subsidized. And out of this subset, it turns out that you need to subsidize only a little bit, only a percentage, up to a level where now your position is again in a shape that you would have a positive premium on the secondary market. So what this means is that in the end, the protocol subsidy is basically a fraction of the total principals, like the sum of all the principals that it needs to protect. So we have cut down on the total liability twice, by taking a fraction of a fraction. And last but not least, the way this subsidy mechanism works is that it keeps all the subsidies within the system, so it's not really paying out any value, it's not leaking value. But here you will see a bit more practically how that looks like. So the key idea here is that, I call it the leverage position here, this is the item in question here. The system has a built-in auction mechanism that is managed by a controller. This controller always tries to make sure that the system, the reserve or the stablecoin supply is sufficiently backed, so you can have a controller that kind of takes the backing ratio as an input and kind of now prices the positions on the primary market based on the urgency of the need for more capital. And this is kind of like an auction, and when people open new positions, they would not just top up the reserve, but they would then pay an extra premium which goes to a separate bucket, which you see here. This is this pool there, down there. And now, let's say Bob bought such a position, and later on he wants to sell it on the secondary market, like the built-in market in the system. And hopefully he can just sell it as is without subsidies, but in a bear market, and maybe his position is now in a very bad shape, he cannot do that. So then the system would just detect that. Bob would just list his position and wait a while, and then there is a timeout, and after the timeout, the system would then start subsidizing this position over time. Again, similar to an auction, it would kind of increase the intrinsic value of the position until the market value exceeds this payoff or this this principal of 10. And once that happens, Alice or whoever is the buyer would then buy this position for 10 ETH principal. So that's how the system guarantees really the sale. Otherwise, there would be no guarantee, but thanks to the subsidies, we can kind of make sure that whoever wants to sell a position would be able to sell it eventually for the principal. Of course, the system needs to subsidize, like take the subsidies from somewhere, and it turns out, I mean, according to our preliminary modeling efforts, that the subsidy payments will be much less, even in bad, like, price scenarios, still much less than the premium payments that people pay. So this pool should be replenished more than it kind of depletes over time. So there is like a positive influx, like the influx is higher than the outflux. So yeah, can we crack the stablecoin trilemma? I think we can by building upon like the previous ideas of delta-neutral hedging, but also taking them to the next level by adding principal protection. And then the third ingredient is this built-in secondary market to cut down on the protocol's liability and costs. So that's it from my end. I mean, we are now opening up our research because we are still in a research or conceptual phase, so not just launching yet, but we want to now open up like our discussion to the community. So we would love to get you or people involved in this discussion because I think we need to get your feedback, your inputs and ideas to make the product even better and just also to see whether there is enough demand for this novel hedging product. Right now we are mainly looking for this pricing question, but yeah, it would be awesome if you could follow us on Twitter, or even better, if you could scan that QR code down there and then join our Discord. And last but not least, we would also want to invite you to a community event, which will probably take place in August, but watch out for an announcement. Thank you so much, and I hope that we'll have some time for questions then.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm Ivan, ex-TradFi guy doing options, derivatives, and looking into this. And actually building our delta-neutral stablecoin. And the main question here in this model, when you're basically trying to make a principal-protected product, is in TradFi, it's basically like buying put options. So it looks a little bit like this, and it seems like the main question here is just the price of this protection, which given the current volatility levels, just fundamentally doesn't stack with the available funding which you can get out of, say, the risk-free rates, etc. So have you looked already into the economics of how high is the cost of providing the principal protection in that case? How do you think if it's viable?
So maybe, I mean, just before talking about the costs, I mean, the first question is what kind of premium can we expect? I mean, that also depends, like both the premium and the expected subsidies depend on the fair value, like how to value such a position. The cool thing here and the main insight is that thanks to the built-in leverage, the volatility of the underlying, which is leveraged up, would be much higher. And you know from Black-Scholes and the like that volatility is one of the key, has the biggest impact on the price. So based on the volatility, we can expect like really high premiums in the first place. On the other hand, even when the position plummets a lot, you know, then maybe you are down like in the red, but still just the fact that thanks to the leverage, this position could go up to above the principal relatively quickly, that should be priced in as well. But of course there is a threshold, so there is kind of a threshold below which we expect people to claim their principal protections, like then the system needs to pay out subsidies. And there is also like an upper bound where we expect people to claim their like cores, or we call them like the intrinsic value, the payoff from the system. So there are those two ways, like claiming the protection or claiming the intrinsic value. And yeah, I mean, we are doing currently research on that question with academics and together in a collaboration. So we want to make sure that this really adds up in the end.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
No
It would be interesting to discuss that in more detail.
Sure.
Hey there, I'm Ben. Trying to understand your claim that this will help solve the scalability trilemma for stablecoins, particularly asking about the scalability of collateral and trying to understand how, particularly given that the system uses leverage, how you can expect to find enough collateral to scale the system to trillions of dollars, and in particular, using censorship-resistant collateral.
That's a great question, and that's still one of the biggest open challenges, I must admit, because of course scalability here always depends on the economic bandwidth of the underlying blockchain, like layer 1, and of course on the scalability of the collateral. Now it of course depends on what you use as collateral. If you were to just use plain ETH, then I guess scalability wouldn't be an issue for the foreseeable future. Of course, we want to also look into like staked ETH or like more yield-bearing options there. And then, of course, it's very important that those underlying staked ETH products scale well with demand. But of course, scalability here is limited by the scalability of the lower layers. Otherwise, I mean, the system may become a bit like if your stablecoin is the main driver for the value of the collateral, then that's probably not the best thing, because then it destabilizes the whole economics. So to answer your question, we are still looking into the best collateral asset.
All right, any more questions? Going once, going twice. All right, everyone, thank you. Give a big hand.
Thanks a lot.